Hi, everyone. Welcome to January's Focus Friday. On the screen, you should see the housekeeping. For those of you that have been here, nothing's changed. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them via the Q&A, or you can put it in the chat. Uh, any problems with your session? If you're coming in through a browser, you can just go ahead and hit F5 on your browser. It will refresh, and that usually will take care of any issues. The presentations will be emailed to you guys sometime next week. And that is it. Renee, you want to say hello?
Hello, everyone. Great to be back. And hopefully, I give you a lot of cool information later on in the session. So, thank you for having me back. Happy New Year, by
Anytime.
the way.
Okay, so I'm going to kick it off. I'm going to start by I'm going back to basics. So we're going to start by explaining a simple table request, different components. This is not all inclusive, just to give a basic overview so that if you're looking at code, you can kind of have an idea what you're looking at. So the different components of a report request. So you're going to start by, how am I going to sort my data? Do I need to sort it? Am I going to sort down in the column, or do I want to sort across the rows? Am I doing aggregation or detail? That will determine what verb I'm going to use. Do I have any headings, subheads, subfoot? What columns do you want to see in the report? So the columns are comprised of verb objects. So I'm going to print fields. So the fields would be the verb objects. You could have calculated fields using a compute. We can do totaling. So if I want to total up a column, I can do that easily. I can do report totals, or I could do subtotals. And heading, footing, I already kind of put into my group sorting. So you have a report heading, and then you also have a page heading. The report heading is at the beginning of the report, where the page heading is at the top and bottom of each page. So your basic syntax of a table request are table file synonym, or table file name, master name, what verb you're using, the different verb objects, the different columns you want to see in your output, any sorting, this would include bys and acrosses, any filtering, your ifs and where statements. Then you can have your headings, and then any styling would be at the end. Now, typically, I tell people when you're writing a new report, don't worry about the styling, don't worry about the headings, just get the details how you want it, and then you can pretty it up after the fact. So table file char identifies what file you're reporting against. You can only issue a table request if you have a master or synonym, because we need to know what fields are contained in that particular file. In this case, we're doing sum. So the verb is sum. We're summing dealer cost, retail cost, and we're doing a compute. Now I'll go over more detail expressions in a future session. But this is basically your sum, dealer cost, retail cost, and then we're computing a field using those two fields. If this was a print, we would be doing a detail. So sum means you're aggregating. There are different synonyms for sum. We have write, I think add. Um, for print, for detail, it's basically only print. We also have list. Now, list or print will both contain a field called folk list in order to keep all of the records unique. So in case you have repeating data, you want to have something that makes it unique, and that's what that folk list does. The difference between list and print is list will show you the folk list on the report output, where print doesn't, suppresses it. We're going to do our sorting by country, by car, by model. The bys will sort down the page, acrosses, as it says, will sort across the page. You can add various options to the by. We can say by country subhead, by country subfoot. computed fields, and I want to recompute the expression based on the totaled values at the group level, then you can do a recompute. Um, you have the option of putting the subtotal or the subhead on the by command itself, or you don't have to. You can put it on its own line on country subtotal. So you're going to say on the sort field and then what you want to do with it. So here we're filtering. I want country equals England or Japan. You might see if in your code. So an if is a simple expression. The if can only be if field equals or if field relation of value. A where condition can be a lot more complex. You can say where field equals another field. Um, that's the primary one. You can do compound where conditions, where an if condition you can only have one expression. You can have multiple ifs, and if you do have multiple ifs, then they would be ANDed together. Okay, we're going to add a heading. This is a sample report using the car file. And then we close it out by putting an end statement at the end of the table request. So here's our code. We run it, and here's our output. Notice I get a page 1 at the top of my report. I didn't ask for any paging. So that's the default. You can turn that off by doing an on table set page, no page. So an on table set sets sets a flag that's only good for the table request. Where we have other settings where you might do a set, let's say auto table F equals on or off that you do outside of the table, that's good for then that whole session. But an on table set is only good for that particular table request. So now we have it and that page number is gone. So we're doing on country subtotal. So notice I get my total country England, total country Japan, and now I have a total. Well, I didn't ask for a total, did I? Well, the subtotal as one word will subtotal based on the group, the by field that you're referencing, plus any higher by fields. So if I did by car subtotal, I would get subtotals for car, country, and total. If I only wanted the subtotal at the country level and didn't want that final total, I could say on country sub dash total. And that's what the difference between those are. Let's make it a little even more prettier. So we're going to do an on-table set style, and I'm using the enwarm .sty, which is provided with the product. And the report now looks like this. Okay, this is a more comprehensive outline of the things that you can have in a table file section. Not only do we have fields that you can print or sum, but we have prefix operators that work on those fields. So if you want to do like an average or a total or a count, then you can go ahead and add those in the prefix operators. And we can go into those a little more in a future session. Uh, Ryan, you have your hand up. Do you have a question? You want to put it in chat? Oh, nope, you took it down. Must have hit it by accident. All right, any questions on any of this? We got our bys, by highest, by lowest, if you're sorting ascending, descending. We can do in groups of, so if I want to see in groups of 10, it'll then do my by groupings. If it's numeric within different, 0 to 9 and then 10 to 19. Let's see. Record limit, read limit. If you're writing new code and your database is millions of records, you might want to only do a record limit of say 5 records, so that way you can see what 5 records you have without having to read the entire database. Best practice as relates to where statements. For instance, how much does something slow down if you have 5 or more where statements? So the where condition is basically going to evaluate the expression to a true or false. Depending on how complicated it is, and if you're using, let's say, lots of user-written subroutines in your in your expressions, then it could take a little extra time. But I mean, hopefully, it shouldn't be taking up that much time. The rule of thumb is when you're doing a filtering, you should always use real database fields. Try not to use um, a define. So say you have a define on a field and you use that in your where condition. Because what's going to happen is if it's in the database field, you've already read the value and you can throw the record away or keep it. Where if you do a define, we're going to read the record and then we're going to have to process all the defines and then determine if we're going to keep it or not. So you get rid of it in step 2 as opposed to step 4. You're welcome. All right. We have on table hold. If you want to reuse the data set, the results of this particular table request, so you can hold it. For you guys in the WebFOCUS world, we have PC hold, which will show it if you're running from the reporting server console, it'll show it in the reporting server console in a frame. Also, went too far. Also in the client, it's just to show it so it goes to a window. More we'll go over later as a future point, but if you have multiple files that have the same fields with the same formats, they don't have to be the exact same layout, just the fields and the formats need to be the same. You can append data from the other data source using a more. So we say more and then the second file, and then all you put is the if condition or where condition. By doing this, you don't have to put the verb or the verb objects because it's going to take them from the main request. And then to finish, we have end. We also have run and quit. Run, so end says, I'm done with the request. Go ahead and do the processing and then close all the files. Run says, I want you to run this request, but I'm going to have another request against the same table. So then I can do a whole secondary request now, another print or sum, and your verb objects, your sorting. So the whole secondary request coming after, but as long as it's coming from the same master file, the same source, then we don't have to reopen it behind the scenes. So if you have a lot of reports coming from the same data source, you can do the one table, do a run. Second request, do a run. And then at the end of your final one, you can do an end. Because when you run a request behind the scenes, we go check, make sure you have the master, and then we parse the master to make sure there's no errors. So if you didn't do a run, you're going to have to do those 2 steps every time. Using the run, and you have 5 requests saved for the same master file, then you're going to only have to do those 2 steps once. So it saves a little time. All right, that is all I have, unless there's any other questions. All right, let me stop sharing and then I'll pass it to Renee.
Okay. Are you good?
I'm good.
All right, then let's give me a moment here. And okay. Well, thank you everyone for attending today's session. It really is a pleasure to be back. Happy New Year. And hopefully I'm going to give you some great information as it relates to Excel with WebFOCUS Designer visualization. So I kind of wanted to just spend time just on the Excel format and what you can do currently within Designer, and maybe some things still outside of it a little bit, but just to give you an overall view of the capabilities that are there. And it is quite a bit. So the very first thing I wanted to do is just go into a retail. This is off WF Retail Lite with the large database, just a report sample that I had put together. So let me just edit. And by the way, I'm running in 932. I'm going to maybe change the zoom just a little bit for the moment. Okay. And you can see we have here what is a standard report in terms of the template that's picked out. So it's a table file. You go over here to the content picker. You can see here you have a standard report. You have a grid. And then there's also a data grid, which is really a chart. That's a graph underneath a graph file command. These two are table file. And the only difference between the two, they're both table file, all have the same exact features, except one has the by display is off by default, and the other one puts it on or by in the code, which is synonymous with each other, so that you'll see the by field values for every row, rather than with a standard report, you only see the by field values when they change, right? And with Excel, you probably would more likely want grid, and we'll go through that. But I just wanted to showcase this example, and it's pretty straightforward. I have in the rows bucket a few fields you might be familiar with if you've used WF Retail, like product category. Within that product subcategory and model, it's actually a hierarchy. And then a column groups bucket, that's the across. I have going across sale year, so you can kind of see that in just the preview here. And then I have a summaries bucket because this is a sum verb. Certainly you can change that either by this option or here, the little ellipse on the bucket, and the bucket name will change accordingly. But typically you're probably going to want an aggregate. And here we have revenue, quantity sold, which are actual fields from the data source. And then we have revenue per item, which is actually a calculated field. It's calculated not at the data source level, but post aggregation. So it's a computed field. And just from the UI, just to go in there and kind of showcase it, I could see it. So you could see the expression. It's just taking revenue and quantity sold and dividing it. And you can see up here that calculate after aggregation. It's grayed out so that you can't change it once you've created the field as such, one way or the other, whether it's a define, at the data source or after aggregation, a compute. Once you've said okay, once you've saved it, it's that. If you needed to change it and for it to be either or, then you would have to do a new calculation, just for information purposes. So let me cancel out of that. And just because I know out there's a lot of coders who want to see source, so I'm going to kind of showcase it here. Maybe zoom up just a little bit, just so that you could see it a little bit. But you can kind of see here that you have table file. And there's a sum and revenue quantity sold. There's our computed field right there, right? And then you can see there's the by fields. And then that column group right there, that's our across on the sales year. And there actually is a small little static where clause on model and everything. And then we got the heading, footing, and then you see some style sheet attributes, etc. But you get the idea. So that's the request that we're dealing with. And again, I'm going to unzoom out a little bit here just to make it a little bit easier for viewing purposes. But I'll try to adjust accordingly for viewing key points. So right now I have it, and this is a responsive canvas here. It has HTML5, but by default, the output, if I ran this, would be HTML. But let me just change it, and I'm going to create XLSX. And actually, while I'm doing this, let me just do a quick overview of the output formats that you see here, right? Because we have it as a report, you'll see some extra formats. You do see HTML, PDF, right? PowerPoint, PPTX, and then we have our XLSX, our Excel output. But when you have a standard or a grid report, a table file command under the scenes through Designer, you also have additional output formats. You have CSV, JSON, and XML. Now, CSV became available in release 9.2, so you would see it there at that time. And just to showcase where we're going to spend a lot of time today is in the Format tab. And if under the drop down, now these options, by the way, just for your reference in Designer, will change based on what you have in your request. So if I didn't have an across, I wouldn't see column groups here. If I didn't have totals, I wouldn't see that there. We'll see output settings. So I want to go to output settings because we're going to spend most of our time today looking at. And you can see because it'll default to HTML, you'll see HTML features here at the bottom and everything. But what I wanted to showcase is with the output format, when you change it, you will see things change here. So here, if I pick CSV, again, this is a 9.2 feature, then really I'm trying to create a transaction file, comma delimited or tab delimited, tab separated in this case. So you can pick, if you pick that format, you have the ability to select these options with or without headers. And then when you ran it, it would generate that output, right? And then with 9.3, we also added JSON and XML, and you'll see you get that output settings and style, because really those are specialized formats and not really intended for styling and everything, but kind of wanted to showcase it. And of course, if I pick these other options like HTML, you saw there was HTML features down below that are specific to HTML. And the canvas will update, and it takes a bit because I do have all data. Not something typically you'd want to do in Designer, but I wanted to be able to showcase all the data even in preview. And then here, PDF, you would see you have accessibility, and for PowerPoint, you don't see any options up there as well. But really, we want to spend our time in XLSX and the features that are available there. So it just gives you an overview of the report rather than spending time just creating the report. And that's something, if you're interested for the future, that maybe that could be a future session, just generating a report and doing certain little things like, subtotals, kind of the things that Walter just talked about in the core language side, and how that kind of gets generated with automatically through the tool. But proceeding with XLSX. So with XLSX, let's just run this report and just see what I get. And actually, one thing I do want to do is change the page to landscape. And just let that run. And then I'm going to just run this output. Just so that you can see it without me having done any changes, and just changing the output to XLSX without anything else. So I'm going to say, and let's take a look at the output.
Renee, somebody was asking what version are you using?
Oh, I did say that. It was 9.3.2. So I am running in 9.3.2.
Thank you.
But I'll try to make notes of where things are, like I did with the output formats, where they're not in that current release level. Okay. And you can see, certainly, I have my XLSX. I can enable editing, but it's not really here. But you can see I can scroll, and I can go through, and I have the across values for the different years. There's a report row totals that I just have to put a title on that's different. And certainly I could scroll down, and I see all my output. And you do see ad hoc requests because I'm running this within the Designer tool. Had I saved it and run it that way, in which I'll showcase that now just so that you can see the difference. So I'll close the output. So again, that was just giving you, without changing any of the XLS features that are available, just running that report in XLSX output format, right? That's all I did, was change the output format here from what it had been defaulted to. I'll come back to the hub, and I'll go to this report, which is that same thing, just all the XLSX output is already saved on that. That's the only thing. So it looks exactly the same as the report I just showed you. And let's just run that in a new window. Just take a moment. You can see the report name on the XLSX file. And then actually, I just wanted to mention the title text, so you could see that it has the name of the report. There was a limit to what the worksheet name can be, so that's why you kind of see the output that you see. But otherwise, it's exactly the same. Now, some of the things you might want to think about is, right, again, using grid instead of standard report with Excel, because you want these cells to probably be populated. You can do that a little later on in the demonstration, but I wanted to mention it up front. That's probably an important aspect to be aware of. So, okay, let's close that out and come back to the report. So I want to go through the different features that are available. And I think it's worth spending the time on, because Excel output is a very important output format, regardless of whether you're using WebFOCUS or not, but certainly in WebFOCUS. And we actually enabled a lot of features at the 9.3 release level through the tool. If you were at 9.2, you would have had the freeze option that we'll go over, and you would have had enabled Excel tables. But you wouldn't have the other features that you'll see that I'm going to go through. They became available at the 9.3 release level of WebFOCUS. So if you're at an older release level, you might not see all of these options. But just to be aware, I mean, in the core language, they're there. But enabled through the UI, through the tool, in 9.3, most of these features were enabled with the exception of freeze and enable Excel tables. So you can still leverage them if you're at a 9.2 release level. Okay, so let's go through the different options that are available. And I like to go in a certain order just to kind of where it makes to me a little bit of sense. And the very first thing is probably an important one is generate native Excel formulas. So I kind of already reviewed the fact that in this report, we do have a computed field. So just as a refresher, right? If I come back here, revenue and quantity sold are actual native fields, but revenue per item is a computed field. Now, when you do Excel formula, XLSS formula, behind the scenes, any computed fields, so the calculation will be actually transferred to that Excel output that is generated. So we do have a computed field that is part of this request. And again, just to refresh from a source code perspective for reference, you can see that computed field right here. And then coming back, okay, another key point that you might notice that on this report output, you'll see calculated on accessories here, right? And you'll see that revenue has a value and quantity has a value, quantity sold, and revenue per item has a value. But on the subtotals, on the recalculations for product subcategory, like where it's headphones, you'll notice that revenue and quantity don't have values. Within the tool, we said we only wanted to see on that line when it's generated the revenue per item. So that really has to do with when we're generating that subtotal output that we said we really only want this one. We didn't want to see these values. So I kind of added that in deliberately because I wanted you to see the impact on the Excel output when we generate Excel formulas. So let me come back to the Format tab, right? So I'm still in Output Settings here. That's where I have my XLS features. And I'm going to generate native Excel formulas. Just click a checkbox. It's as easy as that. Now, of course, I do have a computed field within my request. If you don't, then there's no real formula to pass over on the Excel side. So let's just run this. Give it a moment to run, and we'll get the output displayed. There we go. Bring that up. And now you can see here, right, revenue per item. If you look here, now that I hover over, you can look here at the formula. You can see the formula bar. It's D5 divided by the E5 cells, right? And that's these here. Same thing here. And then in fact, even where I don't have the revenue and quantity sold, right, for here, I do see the D7 and E7. And if I go over to these cells, I can see that it's summing the prior cells. And I can see that over here too, with E18, E15, and the D8 and D15. So we kind of handle that situation. Very cool. And it is easy as that. Again, the thing to be aware of and to remember is that you really have to have actual calculation within your request. It has to be a computed field in order to carry over as a formula on the XLSX form. And again, that's true of whether or not it's through the UI, like I just showed you, or whether it's through the core language. So that's really, it's as easy as that for native formulas, really. The next one that's a big one is always been freeze. Like I said, freeze, the freeze option has been available since 9.2 within the tool, but I'm going to showcase it because it's also available in 9.3. It's an important feature to be aware of. So I'm going to uncheck generate native Excel formulas, and I'm going to select for interactivity the freeze option. And that's all I'm doing. So what does freeze do? Freeze actually frees the column titles in the output, which can be very useful if you're going through and scrolling with large amounts of data. And you have it on the HTML side as well, but we're talking about this for XLSX. So let's just run this. So again, all I did was change that option. I unchecked because I didn't want formulas. I want to freeze. And let's just run that. hopefully this is exciting. This is stuff that, maybe you weren't aware of that exists in the tool. I'm excited by it, and I just want to let people know the options that are available. You might not use everything. You might not everything might meet your business requirements, but it's certainly there. And now you're going to see, as I scroll down, notice that product category, product subcategory, model are all fixed as I'm scrolling through. And even if I scroll over to the right and then scroll down, you can see that columns all the way down to the bottom for the total. Again, it was as easy as just selecting that option in order to say, hey, I want freeze. Now, one thing I like to talk about, it's not in through the tool. And I know that there are customers that have restrictions. Obviously, afterwards, you don't want to go in, you create something through the tool and then have to change it, the source code, and then you can't go back within the tool. But I wanted to show you something that's still, it might not be available in terms of the feature here as an option, freeze with the XLSX, but you can handle it, still be within the tool via style sheet. So there's an addition freeze option that's on top of the regular freeze that allows you to freeze columns. Very, very nice and useful feature. And again, you can still use Designer. So let me show you how you can still use the tool, stay within the tool, not have to do something or change the code manually from an outside perspective, and still leverage this feature. And the way we do that is with a style sheet. So then I'm going to go back to General. And by default, you'll have a theme, which would be usually Designer 2018, unless your site has something set separate. But that's the default. And these are the 4 default themes. And then there are other themes I have created. This is done through the resources themes, custom themes that are created. But I'm going to go to custom. And I can pick templates that might be that are available through the tool, or in my repository, I actually have a style sheet that I want to pick up. And the one that I want to pick up is this Ian Warm. So it was like our old Ian Warm style sheet that you might be aware of from past releases. And I've adjusted it where I added this attribute. So I'm just going to add it. I'm going to select that, open it. So now my theme is that particular style sheet. So it could have everything you want except for this one change. You might have to have a few of them if you want to do different number of columns, but this showcases how you can do everything within the tool, even though this feature might not be explicitly enabled yet through the UI. So that's updating. And then I just want to come again back to output settings, because I'm still going to leave freeze because my style sheet didn't actually specifically handle freeze. I'm leaving it here so it's still being enabled through the tool. And the style sheet really is just handling this additional feature, this additional option. So let me actually run it first, and then I'll show you the style sheet. So I have my style sheet selected, right? So I changed my theme that has that attribute. And then I also have a freeze on for XLSX. So I'm going to keep that and open it. And let's see the output. And now, if I scroll down, you still see, right, the column titles are still frozen. But here's the really cool part. Now, if I scroll over to the right, you can see product category and product subcategory are frozen because I said to freeze the first 2 columns of this request. I think that's extremely useful. And maybe not in every case scenario, but being aware that something exists, that the feature is there, when you need it and know that it's available to you, I think is so important. And that's what these sessions are all about, getting the information out there about what's available to you so that you can leverage it and not have to think, oh, is that there? Is that not there? It's there. And yet again, not directly through the UI, but it will be. But at this point, you can still leverage it and still stay in the Designer. And that's really the key. So then you can see how cool that was. I really love this feature. I don't think enough customers are aware of it. And it really can be nice. And it's specific to XLSX output only. So let me just close the output. And let me just come back to the hub because I actually want to showcase that style sheet just to show you from code. And again, I know the coders out here love when I show code, right? I know I still like to see code. So all I did was take the EM Warm style sheet, and all I did was in the type of report section right here, I added an attribute saying freeze dash column equal N2. That says freeze the first 2 columns. Could have been N1, it would just be 1. Maybe if I would have wanted all 3, including model in that particular example that I just ran, then I would have N3. It does mean that you would have to have multiple style sheets until it's enabled into the UI. But you can see how, again, the point is to give you the information to know it's available, and you could still be able to use Designer to generate your request and stay within the tool without having to make manual changes. And that's really, I think, a big plus. And again, just being aware that this feature exists, I think, is a great positive. So again, just showcasing that. So let's come back here and to the actual request. So that's freeze. And that's freeze, not only freeze, but freeze with the additional XLSX option. So now you do see that there's this other option, interactivity for table of contents. Now I just want to come back and actually come back and change theme. And let's put it back to Designer 2018, just because that's what we were dealing with this for the report, and that was just for demonstrating that one specific feature. So now we're back to that theme. And then I'm going to come back to output settings. And while I have freeze here, I'm going to change it to table of contents. And kind of like what it implies, it's a table of contents, but really what it's doing is instead of having all the data on a single worksheet, it's going to break it out based on that high order by field. That can be very useful, especially if you have lots of data, potentially reportcaster bursting, etc. But just to be aware, hey, this exists, right? So there's a table of contents. This feature was available in the UI in 9.3. And that's all I'm doing is changing that. So I did go back to my theme of Designer 2018, and then I'm using table of contents instead of freeze, and let's run that.
Renee,
Yes, sorry.
there's a question. Can you freeze non-contiguous columns like N1, N3, and 4?
No, sorry, it's not there. It's a great feature. That's something I can mention. Right now, it's just N number from whatever you indicate. So it's either the first column or the first and second or the first, second, and third when it comes to that freeze column feature. Okay. So now you can see the difference, right? So instead of getting the one worksheet when I did with, freeze or the full table when I came in, now I can see accessories, camcorder, computers, all the way through media player, stereo systems, television, video production, and then there was even total because I happen to have a column totals in this request. But that was as easy as just changing and just selecting table of contents. So you have your choice. You can do freeze or table of contents. So now, knowing that, what's another thing? And this actually is one of my favorite features. And again, it was available in 9.2, but and obviously in 9.3, I just don't think enough customers are aware of it, and just to be understanding of the feature. So I'm going to come back to freeze on this right now, and enable Excel tables. So what's Excel table? Just it's a bunch of features, but really it gives you the advantage of easier sorting and filtering. And we can actually take the request and we generate in an XLSX output and create the Excel table for you based on the data. Now I want to show this, and I deliberately have my report done in this way to demonstrate this. So I'm going to enable it. And by default, this becomes available saying my table. That's what the table will be called, with an _1 or 2, depending on whether or not you have a single worksheet or multiple, like with table of contents. So you can change this name if you want, and that'll be the name of that table within Excel output that's generated. So that's all I did, right? So I still have my Designer 2018 theme. I have freeze, and I have enable Excel tables, and I'll just leave the my table default, and let me run that. And let's look at the output. Wait a minute. What happened? I don't see like the little titles with the little drop down, for sorting and filtering. That no Excel table was actually created. I enabled editing here, and I look here. I don't see the my table and score 1. So what happened? This is actually expected behavior. Let me just close that out, and I want to demonstrate. So if you've tried to utilize this feature and you wonder what happened, why didn't it work, let's go back to the actual request. Well, one of the requirements, if you're going to use Excel tables within WebFOCUS and generate that XLSX output, is across is not supported. So you can see I have sale year here in column groups. And again, just from a source code perspective, you can see that's the across right here that's generated. Because of that being in the request, it automatically disables the feature. It doesn't matter whether I enabled it or not. It's automatically disabled because it sees as there is an across. So in this case, I'm just going to delete the sale year. Again, I had to report deliberately with that in just to showcase this type of scenario. So now I'm going to remove that column groups, right? So now sale year isn't in there. And if I look from the source perspective, you can see right now I have my buys and where, but I don't have that across field. Okay. And if I come back to the Format tab, I still have Enable Excel Tables, check still freeze. So let me run the output now and see what happens. And I ran the request. It generated the output. And let's open it up and see what we get. Yay! Now we did get output, and I just love this feature. We did get output, maybe not exactly what we wanted. I'll enable it. One of the things I'll say is, maybe I should have used grid, right, and populate these other cells. That probably would have been an important point, so I can change that. Another thing you might be aware of, and you're looking, you're saying, wait a minute, product category, product subcategory, and model are great in terms of column titles, but with revenue, quantity sold, and revenue per item, you can see that the little drop down, right, the little icon is over the text. And that's because, right, we know that numerics are right justified. Alphanumeric, right, titles will be left justified just by default. So I would have to change the column titles to be left justified to kind of handle that situation. And then again, maybe put grid on. Let's see what happens. So let's try to improve that output. So here, I'm going to say, let's go to, actually, let me change the format first, right? So I'm going to make this a grid. That's data grid. So let me hover over grid. And again, maybe just expand it just so you can see it here as well. Grid. And while it's run, so that you can see that the sort field values will be for every row displayed. Okay, that looks good. And now I need to fix my column titles. So where I want to go. So I want to go to columns. Oh, and by the way, did you notice now you don't see the column groups anymore, right? Because I removed sale year from column groups, you don't get an option to do anything with that anymore because it's not part of the request. So columns. And what do I want? I just want to impact the title, not the title and values. And I'm going to keep all columns, although I could have specifically addressed each one, the three that I care about. But I'm going to say all columns because it won't hurt this particular request. And then I want to actually left justify it. And then you'll see in preview, outputs left justified. So, okay, I made the change where now it's grid, so I can see all the sort values, and I can also have the column titles left justified so that you don't have the little sort filter icons over the title text. And of course, I could have made these multiple rows, like revenue per item with commas for the column title. I didn't do that, but just to be aware that that's certainly valid. So let me just run that. And again, open the output. And ta-da! Looks much nicer. I'll enable editing just so you can see. But now you can see here that you can actually see the grid, right? So you got the values and all, and I can then sort appropriately on that if I wanted to, and eliminate filter as you do, and certainly for the numerics as well, if that were to make sense. But just the point is that now we have a report that looks better. You don't have the column titles being displayed underneath the attributes for the Excel table. And then also you can see that my underscore table. So whatever you put that name in when you enable the feature, by default, it'll be my underscore table, and then it'll do _1. If it has more tables than that, like if you use table of contents, then you'll see more tables here. And if I just highlight it, you can see it highlighting the Excel table. Again, very cool feature, easily enabled through the tool, requiring little effort, maybe a little time in thinking about in terms of column titles and making sure that you're using grid, which you probably were using anyway if you're using XLSX. But again, just to be aware of it. So here, let's come back to output settings, because now I just want to make one other change. I'm going to leave enable Excel tables with the My Table, and I'm just going to change this to table of contents, leaving everything else the same. And we run that. And there's the output coming up. And now you can see the difference. And maybe you don't need it broken out into separate worksheets and everything, but you can see that you can still use Excel tables, and they can be broken out into separate worksheets, which might be useful if you have large amounts of data being written to the Excel file. That might make it easier. This is, while it is summary data and everything, it's not so large or manageable that maybe it could be just a single worksheet. But again, the point of this is just to show you what's available to you with utilizing the features and everything. I love this Excel tables feature. I think it's great, and just maybe not enough of customers are aware that it's available, and just a little tweak here and there, you'll get exactly what you want. And it's really valuable. So if it's something that you like and you want to take advantage of easier sorting and filtering when you're in Excel, enable that Excel tables feature. Now, let me close this out and come back. So I kind of covered almost everything, but what I didn't cover is Excel template, right? An Excel template, it's a little bit different, right? You have to create something outside of WebFOCUS that is a template file where the template, at least one worksheet, WebFOCUS will write out to one worksheet, assuming this is not compounded, and we're not dealing with that in this example. This is just a single piece of content. But that template then takes and feeds whatever WebFOCUS wrote to one worksheet into another worksheet to do some kind of manipulation. So the Excel template I have has a pivot table and a pivot chart displayed on worksheet 1. And on worksheet 2 is where I'm going to write the WebFOCUS data from this particular report. Now, you have to think about this a little bit. Remember, it's feeding in data. So I really don't need a lot of the things that are a part of this report that you see. So I'm going to come back to settings. And I don't want headings and footings. Again, this is kind of like, think of it as like you're writing kind of raw data to the worksheet, right? So I don't need my headings and footings. I really don't even need my column totals, because the worksheet's going to handle that for me in terms of the pivot tables that in this particular template file that I have. Maybe I don't care about having the filter. That I certainly could have left, but let me just remove that. So I had a lot of page break stuff here, right, on product category and product subcategory. I really don't want those lines to be in that raw data. So I'm actually going to remove that. Maybe that might be something that you want, but probably not. So I'm just going to remove it, and I'm just going to say none. And just give me a second and change it for, and again, the reason why it's taking a bit, because it is live, all data. Again, not something you typically want to do. I'm just doing it for demonstration purposes. So then I'm going to change this to none as well. And maybe I'll add just a few fields. Maybe I'll add MSRP and maybe gross profit. Maybe those are some other fields that I want as part of this request feeding into that Excel template, ultimately generating Excel output. Okay. And then just from a source code perspective, just so you can see what I have there. All right, so you can see here table file. You can see there's my fields. I still have that computed field in there. And then that's MSRP gross profit. And then you can see the free buy fields that I have. So you can see I kind of made this more of a very basic report, right? Not stylized, but just thinking about feeding into a worksheet within Excel that will be utilized in another way. And also remember that Excel template that you have, whatever kind of styling you have on the worksheet that WebFOCUS writes to, it's going to override it anyway, right? So the whole point of it is to put it into one worksheet to manipulate it and utilize it in other worksheets that are part of the template file. So, okay, we have our data set up. So let me come back to format and output settings. And so really now I don't want to enable Excel tables, right, for this because I'm using Excel templates. And let me put freeze. You don't want to use table of contents when you're using XLSX template option. So you can change it to freeze. That's perfectly valid. And then I'm going to click, and I have grid, so that's an important option, obviously, as well. So you don't want standard report. You want the sort values on every row. And then I'm going to select enable XLSX template. And right away, it's going to open up a dialog to say, okay, you need to provide the template file, and the template file has to be in a reporting server application directory. And here is my little one that I have with 2 worksheets with an XLTX extension. And I'm going to select that and open it up. You can see here now that you have it and it's available. And notice now the sheet number as well. This is where the request is going to write to. So I need this to actually be sheet 2. So I could have typed it over it, or I could use the little scroll bar, and I increased it to 2. So I have freeze. I enabled my XLSX template option. I selected my template in 2, and I kind of fixed my report to be more of like raw data, titles and the values versus all the additional styling and everything like that, because I want to feed this into my template file. So let's take it and run it. And I know you don't know the template and you don't have the template file, but I can showcase you at least what the output looks like so you can see the impact. And then let's run. And ran it, open up the output. Now here, I have to enable editing. So let me do that before you really see an impact. This is the first worksheet, but I want to go to the source data. So when I created this template file, this worksheet just had like one cell filled out and everything like that because WebFOCUS is going to be writing to it. So that's kind of a requirement for the template file. But you can see it fed in the data. And it had, here's product category, subcategory model, my verb objects, and then I can scroll down accordingly, right? So all the data is there. And you can certainly see freeze actually work too. I think that's kind of cool doing it with it. So if you're looking at it, you still have the titles available to you. That's kind of why I like freeze with it. Again, don't utilize table of contents with template file. And then going back to the first worksheet, when this template was created, it had a pivot table with a pivot chart. And that source data has been fed in, it actually has populated automatically product category to be selected. So I can actually go select product category, product subcategory, and then maybe some numerics like, let's see, revenue and gross profit. And you can see not only did it impact here the table at the output, but you can see here it impacted the chart. And because I'm scrolling with data, you can kind of see there. It looks a little bit off, but that's just because of the session. So really nice option that's available to you. Again, what are the requirements here? The requirements is that, I'm going to close that out. I don't want to save it. But the requirement is if you're going to use Excel template, make sure that you select freeze. Don't utilize table of content. Think about that the request is really data being fed in into whatever template. Now, remember, you create the template file outside of WebFOCUS. So it is what you is. This is just showing you how you can create a pivot table and pivot chart utilizing a template file and utilizing the XLSX template option to feed into that what you've created as part of that template file. So I know that's a really high level overview. Certainly, if you have questions, you can always reach out to support or even reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to kind of follow up, particularly if there's something else that you're looking for beyond what we already have. But I wanted to showcase that because I think that's such an important feature. Now, we have a little bit of time left. And what I wanted to showcase, so that's within the designer tool, right? Create visualizations. What I wanted to showcase, and it's something that you might have heard mentioned within product management sessions that they've done about with Excel, with a compound document, with XLSX, and manually repositioning relative objects. So that they're not one after the other, they can be to the side of it, actually. That's always been an important aspect.
Renee,
Yes.
before you get into that, there's a
Sure.
question. Can you do multiple tables on separate sheets? in
I
regard to what you
believe
just showed.
I believe you can, right? Because you're creating the Excel template. So you could have it, that single worksheet could be feeding into multiple other worksheets. It's just how you set up the template file. So this was just a simplistic example, but I couldn't see why that absolutely would not be the case. Each worksheet then would be feeding in. And maybe, if it was more compounded, remember, we're just dealing with one thing here. You have that worksheet, but that worksheet could feed into multiple worksheets, which could be multiple Excel pivot tables and charts.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Was that it?
No, there's more. Can the data,
Okay.
so can the data be multiple? Yes. So when you go to the Excel template, if my memory is correct, you can specify what sheet is going to be populated. Is that
Right.
correct?
Well, yes, you could specify that's where you saw I did the sheet number here, right? So I could have 10 worksheets in this template file. Maybe I feed worksheet 10 or even one is my raw, data. That could be the case. But that worksheet could feed into all the other worksheets with that data. It depends on, again, the level of complexity of your template file that you created to be utilized with WebFOCUS. Now, if you wanted to run multiple requests, that gets beyond what this is about, right? Because if you want to run multiple WebFOCUS requests to feed in different data into different worksheets, that's when we're talking about compound
And
documents.
that's what he followed up on. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Although I'm not going to exactly talk about that with the compound document, but that's definitely for that. So think of this as I'm running a single piece of content with a template file, and I'm only feeding in once WebFOCUS data. However I do it, it could be join data, whatever, but I'm feeding one worksheet once. You have to go to a compound document if you want to run multiple worksheets with multiple WebFOCUS requests into different worksheets that impact different worksheets within that template file. So you're compounding and you're building on. So you're creating one, and that template file then builds on with that first request to keep it as that, and you're creating, like, in essence, another template off of that then feeds in with the second request, etc. So that's a compound. It's beyond the scope of this, but that's certainly doable. But we were talking about just Designer today. Okay, good. All right. Still got enough time, hopefully, Walter,
Yep.
for your session. Okay,
You're
I
good.
think it's all right. Good. So, as you guys know, right, I can talk. So, but I want to make sure that you have the most information possible and to empower you to get the most out of the product. Truly, that is the goal. So, within the WebFOCUS Hub, I was dealing with create visualization. I want to go to compose document. Now, I'm going to talk about document composition next month and everything like that. But I want to showcase specifically with XLSX. And again, I know that this is something, it's manual code, so I know your coders are out there, but I want to build it within the tool and then show you what you can change. Again, I'm building this in 9.3. So this is for 9.3 specifically. I'm going to change this page to landscape. I'm only going to deal with one page. And I'm going to go to some content that I created off of WF Retail Lite. So it's pretty straightforward. Let's go here. And I have this little report that I created here. I'm going to position it. And I don't know, let's skip the height of, let's see, 8.5 with maybe a width of 6. Just to get something there. And I could have stretched it out and did that, but you can kind of see here, you could use a little arrow, kind of fix it and position it a little bit. Okay. So, and I'm just going to maybe reduce this just a little bit just for demonstration so you can kind of see the page and everything a little bit better. All right, so here, so I just put this report on this page, and I'm only going to, again, dealing with document one page only. Now I'm going to add a chart and maybe reduce this a little bit, position it over here next to it. I'll come down about that much. I think that's good. And then let me add another one in and position that. Let me reduce the size of this a little bit first. Scroll down a little bit, take this and adjust accordingly. Get the idea. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but just to demonstrate what I have here. So you can see I have a report with 2 charts on the side of it. And what I want to do is I want to specifically use XLSX as my output format. And that's something that's available in 9.3 as well. I think if you're at 9.2, you still have PDF. You might have a few others, but definitely here you have XLSX. We're in 9.3. And for what I'm talking about that I'm going to make changes with code that you're going to see, you do need to be at the 9.3 release level. And again, this is specifically what I'm running, just for reference, is you can see here version 9.3.2. So, okay, I have this. I just added this report, these two charts, and I just want to run it without doing anything else, just so that you can see the output. We just need a few more minutes. I think we'll cover what we need to do here. This is so cool, though. And I really wanted to bring it to light, even though I know it's going into code. But you can build what you need through the tool. So I'm going to keep this and display the output. And now, if I scroll down, you can see I have the report here. You're not seeing anything over here to the side. And what you will see is the charts below it. Not what I wanted. And not ideal, right? Now, within the UI, we are going to handle relative positioning, right? That would allow you to say, I want it next to it. I don't want it to go afterwards by default, even though I'm putting it here. It all knows it's on page 1. It's just putting it afterwards. So what I want to do here is I'm going to save this request that I just generated. Now, certainly, you can look here. You can see the content, view source, and you can see how it does a compound layout here. And then I have my components, and then the components added in, right, included in. So it was existing content, right? And I'm going to go through this a little bit. So you don't have to worry about seeing the actual code. I'm going to leave it the size it is at the moment. But I want to save this procedure. And let's see. I don't know, let's call it compose document XLSX, and we'll put today's date on it just so you know I'm picking up the right one. And I think that looks good. Okay, so let's save it. So I saved it, I have it, it exists. I'm going to close this out. And now what I'm going to do is, because I like to always be cautious, I'm going to keep my original, but I created this one as a duplicate. And I'm going to edit within the text editor. And now here is where I'm going to actually increase it a little bit so that you can see it a little bit better in terms of code. And what I want to showcase is here's your components that you saw. So here's my table and table 1, and then chart 1, and then chart 2, and they have the includes in front of it. Those are the component names. And then you can kind of see down here, right, the set components where it's being referenced. And there's component type, report, graph, right? That makes sense, consistent with that I had a report and 2 charts, right? Position, dimension. Then we get into these cell positions, cell dimensions, cell relative to, cell position point, relative point, etc. And what I wanted to showcase is with relative positioning, you still need something that has to be positioned absolute. And if you remember, when I opened up that output, it really started in A1, which is 1, 1. So when you see these cell positions, what you're seeing here is the column reference and then the row reference, right? Unlike PDF, right, that's, you know, pixel perfect positioning and everything. But kind of with Excel, we're really cell oriented, right? So kind of think of it in terms of that. So here, this is really like A1. So I wanted to actually start that report in B4. So that would be 2, 4. I'm going to change this from a source code perspective, and I'm going to make that 2, 4. And it helps if I put the parenthesis back. Okay. So instead of being 1, 1, I want it to start in 2, 4, B4. Now, on top of that, I have this chart, which comes after. So when it says +0 and +1, right, that's relative positioning. And it's saying, hey, I'm going to be in the same column, but I'm going to increase it by 1 row to go for the net, to position this output. It's not really what I want. What I want is I want it to be 3 columns over from whenever that report ends, that include table _1 component. I want then 3 columns, and then I want my chart. And I want it at the same position. So I don't want to even go down 1 row. I'm going to put +0. really, that's as easy as that in terms of the changes for that piece of it. So there is one other part to be aware of that I need to change. And that is looking at the cell relative to. Now, again, when we do this in the UI and this is all enabled, you won't have to worry about this. It'll be all done through the tool. But again, you can build what you need here now, and you can still use the language, and it is part of the language. So I'm kind of showcasing how you can build it within the tool and kind of make these changes and tweak it to get what you want. So we have our first report is going to start in B4 using 2-4, right? It's column and row in that order. And then the second component is going to start where I want it to start is 3 columns over after wherever that report output ends, and I want it to be at the same level as that report. And then the relative to is it's relative to that report. So you can see include table 1 that's already done there. And the cell position point is my current object. That's the chart. So where is the cell that I'm going to start in terms of relative positioning is the top left corner of this chart, right? The top left. I don't want it to be positioned with the relative point of the report. The cell relative point here is the report. I don't want it to be the bottom left, because if that is, this is going to go below it. That's not going to help me here. So what I want this to be is actually, think about it, top right. Oh, and it helps if I did a dash. Okay. So what I'm saying here is for the top left of the chart, I want it to be positioned with the top right of the report, and I want it to be 3 cells over at the same level. And then here for the chart, the second chart, which is going to be after the first one, I do want it to be below. So these, in terms of the cell position point and cell relative point, they'll remain the same. But what's key here is I want to say +0 here, right? I want to change that to have, I'm going to say no. I want it to be 0, but I want it to be 5 rows below it. So let me save this just to save my, so what did I change? I changed this. I changed the cell position here and here for those 2. And then I adjusted the cell relative point for here because I want it to come to the next to it rather than below it, right? So these positions, the cell position point is for the current item that you're looking at, for that component that it's on. And the relative point is what it's relative to, which tells you what it's relative to here in the cell relative to attribute.
Renee?
Yes.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, the chart or the include, which one is it? The include chart is going to be to the side of
Yes.
table 1,
Right.
and chart 2 is going to be below chart 1.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
And it helps if I run it, right? So that you can actually see it, and then I can come back to the code. And I know, again, this is a quick little overview. Again, that's what's great about the recordings is you can go back and listen to it and refresh yourself. And I'm using WF Retail Lite, but it can be, you know, anything, just something simple. So let it just run. Okay, it did. And just get the output, because that'll really showcase it, right? Because you saw it. Now you can see it's to the side of it. And here I want to point out the changes we made. Was starting in A1, but now notice if I go to the report, it's B4. That's the 2-4 that we did on that very first component for the report. And then notice now, if I put my positioning on the chart, notice now from where the report is, right? I come here, you can see there's 3 cells separating. That's the +3. And you can see here for the report, right, the top right corner, 3 cells, and then the top left corner. So that's where you get that cell positioning and everything. But that's key. You needed to change that, because if you just left it at the bottom left, then it's going to be positioning it on the bottom and it still be below. But then here is my 3 cells that I added. And then also, if you take a look at the chart here, if you look here, remember I said I wanted the other chart to be directly below that chart, but with 5 rows separating it. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And oops, 5 there, and then you have the chart. So let me just show you one last thing that's very cool. I'm going to close this output. And what I want to do is actually change the cell dimensions on those charts. It's 5 by 15, and I could have shown it in that, but let me just say 12 by 27 for these two. Maybe I want it to expand, it could have been from an image perspective too. But there's the cell dimensions, and maybe just because I'm a little protective, maybe I don't want to override what I already have. Good practice, back it up, right? Let me run that. And it takes just a little bit of time, but we'll get the output in a second. And let's open it. See what I get. Now you can see it is bigger. I'll enable editing just to make it a little easier. But here now you can see it definitely did that. And you can see now if I concentrate on the chart, you can see definitely it's 12 columns across and it is 27 rows down. Because if I look at it, I can see this is row 30 and there are 3 at the top here. And then certainly I have the 5 rows here in between before this chart starts. And again, it goes to 12 across and the 27 down. Now I know, again, this is very fast, simplistic kind of example. And I know making changes to that code could be just a little confusing, but I wanted to give you something that you can reference, such as this recording, to be able to go through and kind of make that change. And again, the goal is not for you to have to make changes through the code, but definitely to have it enabled through the tool, right? That really is truly the goal. But for now, it isn't part of the language. It is there. So you could use the tool to generate what you need and then maybe make those manual adjustments accordingly. So hopefully I gave you a lot of great information today to go back and maybe run with it that might meet some of your business requirements, if not now, in the future, but at least you're well armed with the tools and the awareness of what's available out there for you.
Very good.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions or anything?
Nope, they've been quiet.
Oh,
A
I think I gave them a lot to think about. I hope.
lot of good stuff.
Okay. Thanks, Walter.
All right, so that concludes the main part of the Focus Friday session. We're going to go into the mainframe part. So if you're going to drop, thanks everyone for coming. We'll see you next month. Be sure to fill out your evaluations as you leave. There'll be a link to go to the evaluation. Again, if you're a mainframe customer, Focus customer, please stick around and we'll talk specific mainframe things. Today I'm going to talk about some JCL basics. So we'll give people a chance to come and go. And they're dropping like flies.
Aw.
That's expected. Get my screen share up. Windows open. Okay. So part of what we're doing in the mainframe only section is we have a lot of customers that have people that are leaving the company, they're retiring, and people are finding themselves in roles that they really don't have a clue. So in my heading here, IBM, HAL, JCL, huh? So hopefully this will give you a little understanding of some basic JCL. So when you're looking at a job that's being run, you can get an idea what's going on. Little side note, HAL from the computer in the 2001 Space Odyssey. If you notice that HAL is one letter less than IBM. So coincidence? You be the judge. All right, so we're going to just talk about JCL basics and how to determine if a file that's being used is input or output. So I say raise your hand. You don't have to raise your hands. We can do it virtually. If you know what this is, if you know what this is, you're as old as I am. in quite a few. So this is a punch card. This is back in the day before, when you wrote programs, you wrote them in a punch card, and then the computer will read the punch cards and translate them into the commands you want to do. And I remember I used to have my deck of cards that um, so I could reuse them and not have to keep punching them all the time. But then we got into keyboards. I mean, so there was a whole special machine for doing the key punches. But things are a lot better now. So when we talk about JCL, we say that JCL is comprised of various cards, and that's where the cards comes from. JCL is generally 80 characters long. That's the width of a card. So JCL is comprised of various cards. We have the job card, which identifies the job information, the EXEC card, which tells you what's being executed, and then the DD are the data definitions for the files that are actually being used by the program. Nightmare. Hey, Kathy. All right. Columns 1 and 2 will generally contain a slash slash, and that's to identify it as a new entry or as an entry. Columns 1 to 3 will be slash slash asterisk if it's a comment, and columns 73 to 80 are ignored. Generally, if you look at some code, there might be line numbers out there, but again, since it's ignored, it doesn't really matter. A set of JCL cards is called a deck. So here's a sample code that I have. It's running a program called IEFBR14, which is just a generic IBM utility, and I'm using it to delete some files. All right, so if we look at the job card has the slash slash and the job name, and then in parentheses, you have accounting information. So this is running under my ID. You could have an account, you can have sub-account. There's lots of different things that could be available in here. It's all dependent on what your site requires. The comma and then in single tick marks, the apostrophes, is the name of the title of the job. So it's going to have my name, and if I were to actually print this, the W Brangle would show up on the banner of the output. I have a comment out type run equals scan. The type run equals scan tells the system to process and parse the deck that you're running, but don't actually submit it. Don't actually run it. So this is good to see, like if you have variables and you want to see what they get resolved to, you can do a type run scan, and then it'll show you all the resolutions without actually submitting the job. Notify will specify a user ID that you want to get a message when the job finishes. And then region equals 0K. In this case, I'm running with maximum region size. For those of you that are running 64-bit versions of the Focus product, you want to not use region equals 0K, but you want to give it a mem limit, MEMLIMIT, and should be about 12 gig. Marco, you have your hand up. Do you have a question? Do you want to put it in chat, or do you want me to unmute you so you can put that in chat? All right. So here's another example JCL, and this is to run focus. Notice step 1, execute PGM equals focus. I've got step lib, user lib, so let's go through what all these do. So the execute or step card is the step 01, execute, and then the program that you're executing. Notice I have a step lib underneath it, which basically says you're going to look for the program focus in this particular load library. On the execute, you have the program equals, and if you have any parameters that you want to pass to the program, you can put a comma and put a parm equal, and then indicate the parameter you're passing. You might see some things that say condition code equals 0, not equal. or a condition code for less than or for greater than. This is a conditional run. So based on previous steps or executes that ran, if they match the condition, then that step will either run or not run. So in this case, all previous steps must have had a 0 return code. So they all should have run successfully. In this example of the execute, we have IEB copy, which is a standard IBM copy utility. I have sysprint, which has any messages that come out. I have sysut1, sysut2, and sysin. So the sysut1, ut2, and sysin and sysprint are all DD cards. So these are files, so they're input or output. The sysprint going to sysout equals star means it's going to be an output, and it's probably just going to be messages. Sys1 is going to be an input data set, which is this focusql.data. And then I'm copying it to sysut2, which is going to be a temporary data set. Sysinddd star means that in your JCL, you have in-stream code that you're not it's not in a data set, you're actually putting it in stream in the JCL. So in this case, where these are the copy commands, so we're copying the in data set is going to be sysut1, and the output data set is going to be sysut2. Okay. For data sets, disposition will identify the disposition of the file before the step runs. So notice sysut1 says disposition equals share. The share means the data set already exists, and while you're using it, other users can also use it in share mode. Sysut2, however, is disposition, comma, pass, delete. So the omission of the first parameter defaults to new because this data set doesn't exist right now. The first pass says, if the step runs successfully, I want to pass this data set to the next step. And then the delete says, if the step abnormally terminates, then I want to delete the data set. For new data sets, you also want to include other parameters such as the record format, the logical record length, the block size. The block size, I would always make 0 because then the system will pick the proper optimum block size for you. Unit mostly is going to be sysda, which is DASD, and then how much space do you want to use? All right, so how to determine if a data set is input or output? Sysouts are always output. So anything that has a DD sysout equals, that's always going to be an output data set. Data sets with the disposition of new or just comma in the first parameter, those will always be output because you're creating them. Data sets with disposition old or share can either be input or output depending on the use of the program. So the difference of share is you might want to read a data set, but you don't want anybody else to be able to read it. So then you would do disposition old. But if it's okay if other people read it while you're reading it, then you can do disposition share. If you have old and somebody else tries to allocate it, then if they submitted a batch job, that batch job might just wait until that resource becomes available. Okay, other things you might see, instead of a step lib, at the top of your job, you might see a job lib, which then it's similar to a step lib, but it's available for the whole job. So any step that's being run can take advantage of the files that are in job lib. You might also see instead in your execute statement, execute and then a name, not execute program equals. If you see execute name, that means that you're running a proc. So somewhere there's a procedure that contains whatever code is that's going to be run. And it basically is run as if you included it directly in your JCL, similar in focus to a dash include. And that is all I have. I mean, again, this is just basics. There's a lot more that you can look up when you go over the JCL, but this should at least give you a head start when you're looking at code. Um, any questions? Yeah, so yeah, you'll get the slides and you'll get the a link to the video probably on Tuesday. All right, we're right on time. So I want to thank everyone for coming, and hopefully we'll see you next month. And please remember to fill out your evaluations.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. Have a great day.